Welcome to the Soft Matter Show. This is Amal Narayanan. I'm a chemist and a polymer scientist. In this podcast, we will talk about soft matter science and have fireside chats with the researchers. Please enjoy the show. Hello, soft matter people. Welcome to the Soft Matter Show. Our today's guest is Professor LaShanda Korley. LaShanda is a distinguished professor of material science and engineering and chemical and biological engineering at the University of Delaware. In this episode, LaShanda talked about many important topics. For example, LaShanda explained how she developed an interest in teaching and research, the importance of research at the undergraduate level, and the power of mentorship. We get to also hear the latest innovations in the sustainable material research. On another note, improving and welcoming diversity in scientific research is the responsibility of the researchers. In this episode, LaShanda introduced me to a simple practice that the Korley group follows for finding the similarities in her diverse group. I endorse this practice strongly to get to know your fellow researchers, and I hope many of us also adapt this diversity slide method. With that, let's hear from Professor LaShanda Korley. Today we have Professor LaShanda Korley here at the Soft Matter Show. LaShanda is a distinguished professor of material science and engineering and chemical and biological engineering at the University of Delaware. LaShanda is an outstanding polymer scientist and a leader in plastic innovation. LaShanda's team at Delaware actively studies nanoscale self-assembly of polymer peptide hybrids and sustainable materials. At Delaware, LaShanda is the director of the Center of Plastics and Innovation and NSF Peer on Bioinspired Materials and Systems. LaShanda also co-directs NSF Mersek's Center for Hybrid Active and Responsive Materials at the University of Delaware. LaShanda has received the Kavli Fellowship and is a fellow of American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering and American Chemical Society Division of Polymer Materials and Science and Engineering. Now, let's listen to Professor LaShanda Korley. Welcome to the Soft Matter Show, LaShanda.
All right, great to be here.
Yeah, it's so nice to meet you in person after a long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, the way I'd like to ask the first question to be more like a geographical question. Like, you are originally from Georgia, right? If I'm right.
Absolutely.
So then you moved to MIT, then you moved to Case Western, then you moved to Delaware. So you had lived a big chunk of the east part of the US. So what's the best place, or what's the place that you like to work and live?
So Boston is my absolute favorite city. I love the architecture. It's where I fell in love with running. So running around the Charles River is one of my favorite things. And if you see me at a meeting, you'll see me with my running shoes and heading to the Charles River for a run in Boston. But I've lived in Ithaca, which I love for the summers. Cleveland was really nice because it also has a great running scene for me and proximity to, world-class arts and theater, as well as professional sports, because I'm a big basketball fan. So
oh, wow.
I could easily go. We had season tickets to the Cavs, and so I could easily hop on public transportation and head down to the games after work. So that was nice.
I love Cleveland. I mean, I'm a personal fan of Cleveland and Akron, okay. As you may know, because I'm from Akron, and I have lived that best part. And I think the best part about Akron or Cleveland as such is the access to everything, which you wouldn't believe. People wouldn't believe that, but when you live in Cleveland, you know that we have access to really nice food, really nice culture, like a lot of many things than what Cleveland is known for. Yeah. So you have lived in Cleveland, like as you were saying about the Cleveland part, that Cleveland is very much a innovation center for polymers. So how did you gain your interest, or like how did you start being interested in polymers perspective?
Sure. So I've been interested in polymers since my undergraduate days. I actually was a dual degree student at Clark Atlanta University and Georgia Institute of Technology, chemistry, chemical engineering. And every summer I did some type of research program. And I happened to stumble upon a program at Virginia Tech. And I had the great fortune to work with Tom Ward, who's one of the great research and education pioneers in polymers. So the ACS Polymer Short Course was one that was held in Blacksburg. So I fell in love with polymers during that time, had access to one of the first academic atomic force microscopes during my summers, and just being able to both visualize and test polymers really just kind of set me on that path very early on in my undergraduate days.
That's amazing. So you were in Georgia, then you went to Blacksburg for us. Was it a summer course?
It was 2 summers of an RU program.
Oh, nice.
So I did 2 summers there, and my first publication came out of that summer in polymers. Some great graduate student mentors. Dr. Ward was fantastic, and that whole polymer team of really supporting me in my quest for graduate school, affirming that graduate school was right for me, but also really showing me what I think is great about the soft materials community, that it was inclusive and supportive and welcoming. Just the field of the community really enabled me to think much more about this as a career, right? Being in the soft matter community.
I have a follow-up on that.
Sure.
When I started doing research, the only reason I got interested, or the only reason I could build a story based on what I learned from the classes that I took, was due to the RU, a similar program to RU program that we have here. So what do you think is the influence of RU, or what is the importance of RU? Because you run an RU program, right? So that's why another question that comes up is that what do you think is the importance of an RU program in generating interest in young crowd?
So I think it's exposure, right? So when you're in your classroom and you're taking, thermodynamics or, kinetics, being able to connect to why those courses actually matter as you are thinking about what your future career could look like, right? So being able to have that hands-on connection to learn how to problem solve. I remember my graduate mentor 2 weeks in said, "I'm going on vacation. I'll see you in a week." And I had to troubleshoot, right? I had to, if any problems came up, I remember the hot press broke, a bunch of different things happened. So I had to learn how to be independent and solve problems, and really, think about holistically how to manage a project. So those are things that I learned. I learned a lot about scientific communication during those summers. Dr. Ward was a stickler about both oral presentations as well as written communication. So we had a lot of training and hands-on support for how to communicate your science effectively. I also think that something great from RU programs is you building your network, as you know, right? Our network in the field is extremely important. And I met some phenomenal people. I was in Brazil right before the pandemic hit, and I was with someone who I met during the summer at my RU program, right? And everyone was like, "Well, how do you know each other?" I was like, "We've known each other forever." It just, our careers overlap in many different ways, but just having that networking community of support is also extremely important. And access to cutting edge science and equipment that you may not always see as you are, going through your daily grind of coursework.
Yeah. When I was in my graduate student time, we had we had high school RUs, and as well as the undergrad RUs coming to the lab. And when they come in, especially the one who does not have had any exposure to research before, they come in as very naive and they do not know what is understanding. But in that fraction of 2 or 3 months, what they learn is incredible. It just transforms them. So, and people who really love doing research, they end up going to the path, which is very inspiring to watch and learn from them. So going back to the origins of your interest in polymers, So how did you always picture yourself to be an academician, or was there any, sort of like a peak moment where you decided that this is the path you want to follow?
So I've always been surrounded by a family of educators, mainly at the elementary school level. So you can imagine that our basement was filled with workbooks and worksheets and, every elementary school book. And I think one of my earliest memories is teaching my grandmother, right? So I made up lesson plans. I had a great book. So, this idea of teaching and helping people to understand certain concepts, has just always been ingrained with me. And I've always been intrigued by how people learn. And I think this became more apparent when I was an undergraduate student and I became the de facto TA for a lot of my courses, right? So for me, it was great because I was able to make sure that I had mastered the material because I was trying to communicate and explain it to other people. So this idea of being able to translate different concepts and topics and to meet people where they are and helping them learn was extremely important. And then I also, really appreciate that for me, the reason why this idea of being in the academy is important, so teaching at the university level, is that I can use teaching, but also not just the classroom setting, but the research lab, as you alluded to. To me, the greatest joy is when I get an email from an undergraduate student who says, I've learned so much in your lab. I can connect the dots in my coursework. This has really transformed my education. So for me, I see that the classroom and the research lab are, really, they go hand in hand. And that's the joy that I get, is seeing students who are both graduate students, postdocs, undergraduate students who take away something different. And, it's not just one size fits all.
So how do you train yourself? Like, over the years, you might have went through a lot of teaching, a lot of processes. Mm-hmm. What were some of the key findings that you had, which makes this connection, like how to find this connection between what you learn in the classes versus what you do in the lab? Like, is there any way you can train someone like that?
So, I think it really depends on the student. It depends on the project. But for me, it's trying to get a sense of what students connect to. So, when undergraduate students ask to join my lab, I say, what do you like to do? Do you like to make things? Do you like to break things? Do you like to visualize things, right? And then that helps me to draw connections from what they're learning in their coursework, depending on where they are, as we design research projects. And then for them to go back and say, oh, you remember that stress strain curve, right? So this is what that means. At times, it also helps, since you mentioned high school students, we also, engage with high school students as much as possible as they are interested in science and engineering careers. So even you have had some of my undergraduate students now take a step back and say, now can you explain those concepts to high school students? And that's just another way to reinforce learning. I've also I had the great fortune to teach in Thailand for one summer, a polymer composites course. And, with, language barriers, all types of things, what was really important for me is to just think about fundamentally, what's our common language? And for me, that was math, right? So I was that really stretched me as an educator, right? Because there was a lot of interest, a lot of support, a lot of engagement, but we had to overcome some of the barriers so that we could communicate the information. And so for me, as a way of reinforcing that, it was to break things down into math problems, because that was where we were both most comfortable in our educational pursuits. So I think we all have to stretch ourselves in environments and places that allow us to, examine the topic and to make sure that, we have different learning styles, all of those different types of things.
That actually is an incredible. I think I like the line where you say you like to make things, break things, or visualize things. That's something I should copy in the eventual or adopt. So, talking about like I also believe that chemistry also has a common language.
Yes.
The structures or the way we
Yes, absolutely.
speak chemistry also has its own language like math, which is interesting. Like, and since you're talking about the research, let's move to your lab. Let's see what is the key findings or what are the most hot topics that you're currently working in the lab.
Well, my lab has, broadly is around bioinspired and sustainable materials. And from the standpoint of our bioinspired work, we're really excited about some expanded opportunities of our polymer peptide hybrids. We're moving into composite structures, a lot of kind of manufacturability of these and making responsive systems. So being able to connect some things related to transport and kinetics in these materials for motion and actuation. We do work with biomass, and I'm excited to be able to, really think about making these new bio-based structures that have similar or better performance than petroleum-derived material systems. But then to not only think about the fact that we are deriving these from biomass, but also how can we make them circular? So to infuse some of the things that are also really of interest in my groups around dynamics, to create these more circular types of systems, so supramolecular chemistry. And then we're also really excited about thinking about plastics deconstruction, right? And it's a joy for me as someone who's been in the polymer field for a while, is really thinking about this, the complexity of plastics, right? When we say this is a bottle made of this is polyethylene or this is polystyrene, we all know if we go and order those, they have different grades, right? And those different grades are related to the complexity of either additives, all of these different types of things. And that really will impact how we can valorize plastics waste. So for me, some of the most exciting pieces in that space is taking our knowledge of polymers and applying that to something I think really people have compartmentalized, but it is a much more complex problem.
So we are talking about the sustainability aspect, right? Mm-hmm. You have a center for sustainability, which is pretty new, right? Maybe one or 2 years ago or 1 year ago.
We are about 18 months in. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about that center and like what are the activities involved around that center?
Sure. So the Center for Plastics Innovation, or CPI, is a Energy Frontier Research Center by the Department of Energy. We have partners at the University of Chicago, University of Massachusetts at Amherst, University of Pennsylvania, and Oak Ridge National Laboratory, with, of course, University of Delaware being the lead institution. The CPI is really organized around three major areas. One is on using the expertise at the University of Delaware and at some of our other partner institutions related to catalysis. So how can you create catalytic methods to deconstruct plastics in a way that's efficient and selective? And you can make those into high-value materials, either that can be used as standalone materials or materials that can then be used in our second thrust, which is on upcycling or upgrading of plastics waste. So can we use those building blocks for making new material systems that could potentially be circular? Or can we use different chemical methods, either homogeneous catalysis methods or even biocatalytic methods, to transform or upgrade plastics waste into something that's useful and value added? And then in our third thrust, we're focused on creating tools that will enable all of these technologies, right? And so those tools could be data science. Those are, of course, computational, spectroscopic, rheological methods to really help us to address complexity in plastics waste.
That seems very challenging to do because it's like a multi-university. So what would be your dream goal in that? Like, can you like describe in like one or two sentences, like what would be like the thing that you guys want to do?
So I think to answer that, this is going to have to be, these are the current, you have to think about it without considering kind of the funding mechanism, right? So I think that ultimately what most of us want to do, but, I will speak from CPI's perspective, is to create a set of strategies that will allow us to address diversity in plastics waste. Mm-hmm. Again, there's no one size fits all, mm-hmm. because you have governmental influence, you have consumer influence, you have geographical influence. What we recycle is different. It can be different in one state from city to city. It's definitely different geographically. There's a lot of equity issues in plastics recycling. There's also a lot of differences in what building blocks are used in certain countries, right? So there are some places where you can use catalytic methods. There are going to be some places where you're going to have to use recovery methods. And so I think it's creating a suite of tools that are accessible to address this for a specific problem. Mm-hmm. Because there is no one way, I think, for us to address just the humongous problem related to plastics waste. It is such a global problem, and it's interconnected to how we design new materials, right? So what are we going to do from a product standpoint to reduce complexity? Or how does that go hand in hand with how we recycle? So,
yeah, that seems like a bigger goal of many polymer chemists who are working in this field of plastic innovation, plastic recycling, and I think it's a project which every polymer or like everyone who has a lab should contribute towards to, like even as a side project, or like there should be someone who's dedicating their time for innovations in this realm, because in future it's going to be a very important and problem, and people needs to address this as soon as possible. It's like, and I'm happy that you guys are doing an incredible job in bringing multiple universities and multiple PIs into this into this big of a problem. So that's amazing. And in terms of sustainability, or like in terms of how do you think a student and a citizen can contribute towards changing this view about polymers, or like how can we contribute in improving the way things are done?
Really, I think at the most basic level is understand how our practices contribute to or hinder sustainability, right? Think twice about picking up a plastic bottle, right? Use reusable water bottles as much as possible, from, a basic citizen level. Understanding from a research standpoint is just bringing a sustainability mindset into our workplace practices, right? And that includes, what we order, how we design our experiments, how can we minimize waste, how can we think about alternatives that are, less harmful or more easily recyclable. And I think that there's this balance that we all just need to consider as we're designing all of our experiments.
Sure. So your lab is a combination of, I think, chemistry plus like a little bit of physics and everything else. So what is a typical workflow or like day-to-day work look like for a PhD or a postdoc?
It's very varied. So it's interesting you asked this question. We had graduate recruitment yesterday. And so discussing this with students, I love the fact that soft matter has so many different aspects. There's something for everyone, right? And that goes from someone who's interested in environmental science, someone who's a chemist, an engineer, a physicist, a mechanical engineer. And I loved as a graduate student that I got to play in all of these different spaces, right? There was no, you have a chemistry project or you have a mechanical properties project. It's your project, right? And then it's diverse. So I think every day is different because our projects really span everything from molecular level understanding of how building blocks assemble to really manufacturing actual devices or parts. So, I take, for example, a project that we have on polymer peptide hybrids. One day my student may be making the building blocks to make the hybrid materials, to the next day doing, spectroscopic analysis on the system or X-ray analysis, to now making fibers. I think the latest update, I should have the fiber analysis done soon, right? Mm-hmm. So I love that because it is exciting to have all of these different aspects. And B, I think it's reflective of what we actually do, right? There's a mix of different types of activities that we do, whether, a student chooses to continue in, academia or goes to a national lab or to, an industry position. There's just diversity in the types of problems that we're trying to solve. And I like that training ground and mix.
I think the one key word which keeps coming is the diversity aspect. So I must ask you this. What does diversity mean to you in research?
I think that in general, diversity means to me this idea of that there's not one path, right? There's not one perspective. There's not one way to solve the problem, right? It's what there are multiple ways to solve a problem, which requires us to think beyond our monolithic view of what things should be. And it's, when you say diversity in research, I see as diversity in general, diversity in life, right? It doesn't mean that you want to be around people who agree with you all the time. You don't want to be around people who have your same perspective and everything. We should want to, because the problems we're trying to solve, the people that we're trying to be, require us to have, just everyone has a piece and a part to making our world better. And I think that if we can really appreciate and value who people are, if they can be authentic in what they bring to, any problem or situation, that's what we should all be striving for. And so it's allowing those spaces and places to celebrate who we are, our differences, our perspectives, just all of those different pieces. I mean, we start every time someone gives a group meeting presentation, we have a diversity slide. So this is not something that originated in my lab, but it's something that we've adopted as a best practice for enhancing the way we view diversity. And that slide is for us to learn about people, right? And to see, because we often notice the differences and not the similarities or connection points. And I think that by having those opportunities to learn, okay, I don't like spicy food, but we had spicy food was the conversation on Thursday, right? Mm-hmm. So someone else can say, oh, I like spicy food too. Or, oh, I didn't know you like basketball. I found out one of my students also likes basketball. So those types of things are important.
I think that's a very great example of how to set a path for people to follow the diversity aspect or appreciate it. Can you tell me a little bit more about the diversity slide? Because I'm very curious and interested to know that. Maybe other groups can probably adapt that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are implementing this idea of sharing your journey, sharing your story. I was actually, for the first time, one of the seminar visits that I just recently had asked me to share a diversity slide as well. And I think it's just about letting people, especially in a research community, right? Most of the time we focus on people's science. But yes, you're a scientist, you're an engineer, but you're also a person. And so being able to, share, okay, I grew up in this particular area, and these are the things that are important to me. I've learned about some of my students being amazing artists, right? And that artistry translates to their research, right? So it's just this idea of being able to just learn a bit more because, again, most of us are just trying to be laser focused on the things that we're doing. but you have to be authentic in who you are as you're also tackling those problems.
I completely agree with that statement. And how do you hire people? Like, what is your process behind hiring people? And I'm sure that you have the certain values of that you would look for, because we are talking just about the diversity aspect. So what are the process that is involved while you hire a person to your lab? Or in general, it doesn't have to be the lab.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. So one of the things that my research group does is we generally have a retreat. Of course, it's been virtual as of late, but we talk about what our mission and vision and values are, right? Who are we as a group? And I love this exercise because to me, it just reflects that we all believe in the mission and the support of the research, but how we treat each other and the world around us. And that is exuded when the students are engaged with folks who, from graduate recruiting or postdoc recruitment in the lab. And so for me, I look for students who are interested in, are passionate about those core things that our group is interested in. So this idea of being creative and, excited and passionate about those topical areas, who are, willing to, I think, really, they're motivated, they're curiosity driven, and that they're collaborative, right? That they want to engage with people. They want to be inclusive. Outreach is something else that our group does a lot. So I always, I'm excited when students talk about their outreach, when we're, discussing opportunities in the group and, how they feel like they can make their communities better. So those types of things.
Okay. So you have a lot of responsibility. You are a director of multiple centers in Delaware, and you have a lab to run, you have funding to write. I mean, it's a very complicated job, and it has its own perks too. So, how do you find time to do mentorship? Like, what does it mean to be a good mentor to your students?
Sure. So, I've looked to other people around me as examples. So I think my thesis advisor is probably one of the busiest people that I know. And she has always prioritized, her family and her students, right? Her research group. And that prioritization is listening, right? So being intentional about her engagement. And I think that for me, I tend to let my students know what's going on, right? So I am very transparent. This is the cycle of X, this is the cycle of Y, I'll be traveling here. But we have mechanisms to make sure that if they need support, they know they can reach out to me, right? And there are multiple ways for them to connect with me. So I try to let them know that it's a priority, and that we can always find pockets of time for us to connect to make sure that what you need, you're able to get from me.
That is incredible. So you learn from Dr. Hammond your style of mentoring, and you adapted that, or like maybe adapted that. That's what essentially you are saying, that, which is incredible. That being able to like adopt one system, which is amazing. And it will be I think it will be the most interesting question would be, how did you pick up running in among all this?
Running was a way to combat experiments that didn't work. So for me, it was actually a way for me to work out research problems, right? So I started running, of course, health, fitness, all of those things.
Like running away from experiments, more like.
Right. But it was great because I was able to think through, what some of the challenges may be, just with a very clear head, just me and, being out in nature. And that helps really to, I think as we all know, research is not linear, right? And you're going to have ups and downs. And so having something, this is what I tell all my students, my lab in general, that you need something, right? It's not, you need a background of support and community and connectedness to something, right? So for me, that was running, so that even if those other things weren't working, I had something else that I could connect with. And so that's how I started running.
Nice. So you picked up during the grad school, or like?
I did.
Oh, nice.
I did. Yeah.
Boston is an incredible place to run.
Oh my gosh, it was fantastic. I miss it. Yeah.
So the last question that I want to ask you is that is there any next generation student advice that you would like to give them?
Sure. So I have some lessons that, I have, I was asked this question probably a few years ago, and there's some key lessons that I think are extremely important. One is be prepared and aware, because sometimes opportunities present themselves and sometimes they need to be cultivated, right? So this is where networking and things come into play. I think it's important that all of us speak up and be heard. So every single voice is important. Don't think yours isn't, right? We all have, our own visions of, my voice shouldn't be the most important one in the room. And that's why I tell my undergraduate students and my high school students, you have just as much a voice as the graduate students and postdocs. So speak up when we're in group meeting. I think it's important that we cultivate leadership and share knowledge and demand high ethical standards from each other and from ourselves. And I think that the world benefits when we do that, right? I think that it's always important that you pursue your passion and stay true to your values and your ideals, right? Don't let situations sway you one way or the other. Stand up for what's right. I think it's also important that we push boundaries and defy the mold. And this is where this idea of diversity and innovation comes in, because I think when you do push the boundaries and you don't always think about the problems the way people expect you to think about them, that's where innovation and creativity result. And I think it's also important that we take pride in our work and know our value. And the last one is that mentoring is important. And I'll, add mentoring and advocacy is important. So we should have mentors and we should be mentors. And don't think that you have to be in a certain career stage to be a mentor. We can all support one another and advocate for one another. And I think that's one of the beauty of the soft materials community.
Yeah, very powerful statement. Even I felt very welcomed in the soft matter community, because I started as a chemist. I traveled my things around controlled radical polymerization, then moved to a little bit more of the soft matter aspect, and now it's like biological soft matter is what I do most of the time. So it's a very welcoming community. I think it's also because it's very diverse. Mm-hmm. Because the people on soft matter community can be from computational, or from physics, could be even from biology. So that diversity makes it much more strong, and people can easily contribute in, because you don't feel weak. I think that's the most key aspect of the soft materials community in general, which is amazing. So is there anything that you wish I had asked, or is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think you covered a large bit of the things that I think that we all should be talking about.
I will add that mentoring and advocacy are important.
Sounds good. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you so much for your time, LaShanda. Right.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's it for today, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Please find the show notes at thesoftmattershow.com for more details. That is thesoftmattershow.com. You can write your questions, suggestions, and everything else to me at Amal Narayanan at thesoftmattershow.com. See you with another exciting episode soon. Until then, goodbye.